Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So obviously we are a couple of days away from Christmas, right? And one of the central holidays, one of the central festivities of Western cultures. Um, in its more recent rendition, it is obviously Christmas or Christ Mass, the birth of Christ, right? The the birth, the time where God incarnated into the world, into the human world. Divine meets profane, right? Meets human. But this time of year has been celebrated and venerated for thousands of years prior to the advent of Christianity. So there's nothing new under the sun, so to speak, right? Or there's nothing new in speaking about the sun. But the reason I want to talk now, and the thing I want to talk about, is related to Christianity, but not solely related to it, right? It is related to worldviews, how we see the world, how we perceive the world, how we think about things, right? How we decide what is good and bad. And I have a couple of points here, so I'm looking off to them. Because what I'm seeing more and more is the dialectic unfold, right? And the dialectic is this force meets its opposite, right? And what that tends to end up doing, it reinforces and it continues, it causes to continue a certain pattern of thinking. And that pattern of thinking is the false dichotomy thinking. So things are either this or they're that, right? And what we're seeing more and more and more, and this is something that concerned me a long while ago, right? A long while ago. When you start getting into all these subjects and stuff, and what is the history of this, and what worldview have we been in for a while, and what are the origins of that? Who are the people involved in developing that worldview? And is it a good one for us, right? Regardless of what it is. So we are coming from a predominantly, nearly in totality, a Christian worldview, a Catholic worldview in particular. And what you're seeing being pushed in the West is Islam at the moment. All the politicians are, in appearances at least, they're all Muslims, right? They might not come out and explicitly say it, but the support that they give for that religion renders them a Muslim in my eyes, right? And you're seeing, and this is called out generations ago, right, and decades ago by people who studied this stuff, the clash of civilizations, right, the inevitability of the clash of civilizations between the Islamic civilization and the Christian civilization, right? So predominantly Arabs and white people. But there's a flavor to it, right? There's a facade laid over that. There's something draped over the conversation of racial civilizations, racial clashes in the forms of each respective civilizations. And I would like, because I think we have to, and I will harp on about this until the day life leaves my body, or until the point where I do not feel it necessary to continue to talk about this. Because I'm seeing a lot of people fall clean into this dialectic, right? Where we were Catholic, we kind of fell into a no man's land there. We seem to have, regardless of what people will argue, they will argue that the reason we no longer have our faith and no longer follow Jesus and that Catholic faith is because of liberalism and because of Marxism and because of all this stuff. I would suggest that that's a nonsense, right? Because if our faith was so strong, it should have been able to defend and protect us from competing or ideologies. It didn't. And in my eyes, we put our hands up and walked away from something because it didn't suit us anymore, right? Its time had come and gone. And people will argue that, but great. Give me your perspective on it. Give me your argument for that. So we're in no man's land after moving out of the age of Catholicism. And at the same time, you're seeing the exponential growth of Muslims and Arabs and Africans and people not from the continent being paid for and being bussed into this continent. And you're seeing the fallout from that as well, right? So you kind of have three ideology or three different ways of looking at things, but two end up falling under the same umbrella, which is the college-educated worldview, post-modern constructivist ideology, right, where you can be anything you want to be, and what you think, how you describe something, the definitions, the words you use, is what the thing is, right? So if I call myself a wardrobe, I am a wardrobe. If I feel like a wardrobe and I declare myself one, then that is what reality is, okay? And we're spellbound by this stuff. We're spellbound by the words, and we don't know what to do, and we don't know how to argue it. But we have I suppose, the loudest kind of consensus ideology at the moment, which would be a liberal ideology, right? And you're your own hero, total individuality, and we've tried that on for a couple of decades now, and people, it's worn thin pretty quickly, right? Because it's sort of empty. It's entirely negative in its inception and in how it works, right? In its outlook on Western civilization, it's entirely negative and it's entirely destructive. It just complains and points out errors and blind spots and things, right? But it never really offers anything positive or anything uplifting, okay? And we have a growing section of the population in this country, a growing number of Irish people who are disillusioned with that, probably never got on board with that, and are just starting to see it as the danger that it always has been, okay? It's also recognizing that this liberal ideology has opened the door for a theocratic element to come in, which is a governing system that it cloaks itself in religion, but it's not, right? It gets in, it infects, and it controls every aspect of your society, right? Every single layer of your society is controlled. So it's nearly beyond that, right? It's a total political system under the guise of being religion, okay? Or maybe they're both the same thing and there never really was any separation between the two. You're just using different words to describe a similar thing. But either way, we have a growing number of people in the West as well that are disillusioned with what the 20th and 21st century offered up as a release from organized religion. And that's dead in the water, okay? But the consequences of the policies and all that sort of stuff that this ideology, that stemmed from this ideology, that grew out of this ideology, is the growing Islamic population, right? And the spread of Islam across the West. So what you're seeing here now is, what I'm seeing anyway, is people beginning to look back and go, do you know what? What came before this wasn't so bad. I preferred it growing up. What was different? Well, people went to church and people were predominantly Catholic in name, right? And some in practice. And life seemed to be a little bit better at the time. Therefore, if we just go back to that, then we will have something to defend ourselves with. We'll have a foundation to be able to assert ourselves against this growing Islamic problem, right? Because it's a problem. It's a problem. It's religion aside, all that nonsense of Islamophobia nonsense aside, it's an ideology. It's a way of seeing the world and seeing human nature and seeing society that is totally antithetical to the Irish nature, right? So the Irish answer, or the Western answer, or an answer that I believe is being pushed and promoted, is just go back to church. Go back to believing the way your parents and grandparents believed, and things will be okay, right? You'll have something, you'll have a weapon to use in defense and in offense against another growing ideological threat, right? A way of seeing the world. And I think this is a massive problem. I think this is such a bad problem that I would call it a symptom of the retardation of the Western mind. And I know it might sound like a strong word, but I believe it to be the case. where the only thing we can come up with is this or that. We're either Catholics or Christians, or we're just going to be taken over by Muslims, and we'll be whipped into the Islamic ideology, and there's the answer, right? So if you go back to Jesus, go back to Mass, go back to believing again, as if that's an easy thing, right? I can just decide in the morning to believe again, right? Or to believe for the first time. Again, a retardation of the Western mind. So there's always a third option. There's always a third, fourth, fifth option. There's loads of options you can take from the buffet, right? There's a buffet in front of you, and all you're looking at is this plate or that plate. It's silly to me, and it's dangerous. And something else I've seen as well. Obviously, you have imams and people who are promoting the Islamic faith not particularly well. Like, I don't know what the big selling point is on it, other than a stable group and perhaps safety in the fact that you are part of the doctrine or part of the group, and therefore you won't be punished for being an outsider, right? A kafir. You won't be punished for that. So there's safety in numbers. Outside of that, I'm not sure I see many great selling points that are particular or peculiar to Islam, that people don't have by themselves or in just other everyday attitudes to things like discipline, or I don't drink anymore, like I'm staying off drink. It doesn't make me a Muslim, you know, but it's just something I choose to do. Like, people can come to them kinds of things without the need for an Arab worldview, right? Or what isn't currently an Arab worldview. And something else I seen, and it blew my mind, and I just started laughing, was on X. We now have, hang on a second. So we have a page on X. Hang on now. Load. Yeah, so we have a page from, or it's called anyway, the Knights Templar, right? So where is this? There's a good few of them, actually. So Knights Templar International. And what they're promoting, and this is no small page, it has nearly 80,000 followers, right? So the first thing up: on this day, Christian forces defeated the Ottoman Empire, an Ottoman army outside the gates of Vienna in 1683, thus saving Europe from the clutches of Islam. We came, we saw, we conquered, right? And all this sort of stuff. Our Arab Christian brethren march in East Jerusalem this Christmas, right? So this is serious stuff, because what we're dealing with here and what we're seeing is a nearly medieval worldview. We're being dragged back into pre-Enlightenment, pre-Industrial Revolution, pre-modern worldview, instead of kicking on and moving on and learning the lessons from our failures and our hiccups along the way, and cultivating something better, something more pragmatic, right? Something more aimed at the future, something that is friendly to the future, right? We're going backwards. Or I would say there's forces at play in the world that are attempting to fence us in and attempting to create a boundary around us with only one or two options as to how we get out. You can't jump the fence. You can't break the fence down. You can go out gate A or gate B. You can be a Muslim, or you can join the Knights Templar. Right? So this is the dichotomy that is being foisted upon the Western people after decades of apathy, isolation, loneliness, existential angst, all that sort of thing, right? Lost in the woods, don't know our arse from our elbows, nothing means that anymore, people aren't as good as they were before, decades of this disillusionment with life and with your own people, and then you get offered a chance to go back to the Stone Age, really, like, you know, in comparison to where we are or where we could be. You're getting offered a chance to go back and engage in the modern day crusades, but under the banner of the Knights Templar, right? And people might say, well, look, isn't that what's needed? To which I would say, what do you mean? So do you mean that we have a fight on our hands? Absolutely. Is Islam something that needs to be conquered and then just shoved out of Europe altogether? I would say yes. Doesn't mean I hate Muslims. I just believe that the ideology is subpar, it is anti-human, and it is totally counter to what I view as Irish people, right? Because it's totally counter to me, and I'm an Irish person, right? So I don't believe it is any place here. I don't believe it's any place here. So, but does this mean we need to don or go under the flag of the Knights Templar? I don't believe so. Again, it's a false dichotomy, and people are falling into this. Whereas if you're against Islam, you have to be Christian, because being Christian is the only way of defeating Islam, because Christians defeated Islam back in the day, and Islam is here now, and we need to defeat Islam. Therefore, we need to be Christian again. I don't believe so, right? I think there's probably a utility in it, but I think it's just cheesy to me. If you're not already a total obedient follower of that faith, then deciding to tell yourself that you can go back and become a believer again for the sake of something else. It's not even coming from your own heart. It's to serve a pragmatic end or a practical use of aligning people to combat something else. If that's what your religion is going to be based on, you're better off without one. You are 100% better off without one, because you are a fool. You will be used as a fool if you're willing to accept a total worldview, right? Post-life and all. If you're willing to sign yourself up for that, for the sake of combating something else, combating some other people who have a foolish notion of what life is and what the world is, I thought we grew out of that. Do you know what I mean? And I believe that there was an opportunity there for us to grow out of that. And just because the modern academically propped up perspective on where we are in our current day left a lot to be desired, it doesn't mean that it wasn't right in some areas, right? And I think one of the great ways that it was more right than wrong is in the perspectivist worldview, right? That there's not just a standard morality that everyone should abide by, or a standard way of practicing a religion and respecting and communing with this beautiful creation, which is the universe and the creator, whatever that you want to call it, whether it's outside of the universe and the universe is its creation, but it's not really part of it, or whether it created the universe by turning itself inside out, right? And we are all part of that living deity or living God, right? Whichever perspective you want to take on it. There's no uniform way of approaching that, which is what we've had for centuries and centuries and centuries. People have been killed because they dared to think, they dared to perceive of a different way of experiencing life and experiencing themselves, right? People gave their lives for that stuff. And because there's a threat at the door, we want to rush back into that again. I think that's insane. I think that's absolutely insane. And people would get on to me going, you're attacking Christianity. And yeah, I am, because Christianity, same with Islam to me. Here's your ideology, abide by it, or there's a punishment for it. No, thank you. That did not work when I was a child. It will not work with me when I'm an adult, right? That is nonsense talk, right? And I can't, even if I wanted to absolutely be a believer, and I did, my life would have been a lot easier if I was a natural believer in Catholicism, right? I had no ill experiences with it. I'm very fond of it. I'm very intrigued by it. I love the study of it. I love the study of all religions, all gods, all mythologies, all interesting ideas that humanity has had since we don't even know how long. That's the fascinating thing about it. We've no idea how long we've had these ideas, right? We've no idea how deep these ideas go, right? So to tell me that I should sign up for a binding barrier where my framework is decided for me, the way I perceive and experience the world is decided by somebody else. No thanks. No thanks. And any practical use that might have of gathering people together, it will soon run its course, and you, before you know it, you are in another tyranny, another theocracy. And to move us slightly away from religion into the realm of psychology, because it's a way of speaking about things that is more modern and probably more relatable to some people than gods and Bibles and holy books and stuff like that, right? So, where did I have that now? Laptop. About to go out the window. But, hang on a second, I get it. No, it's gone now. But anyway, the perspective that I want to talk about is James Hillman, who is, I believe he's an American psychoanalyst or analytical psychologist or psychotherapist, and he was a student of Carl Jung's, right? And he has probably a perspective, there's the word again, right? A perspective on man and existence and the mind and spirit, soul, religion, all that stuff. This all comes from man, right? And he talks about psychology needing to be polytheistic in its perspective, right? And what he's doing there is he's not starting from God and working his way to us. He's starting from each individual. And he's looking at, again, working with clients and people shaping their minds and coming to know themselves, all that stuff. So you get to know a little few things, right? You see things that kind of make you question things. But he's saying that the contemporary understanding of the soul or the spirit or the self to him, or at his time, was one of unity, right? It was a central thing. There's one self, and it is a perfect, it's a whole, right? He kind of went against that, and he's saying, if it was a whole, and this is a simple experiment you can do it yourself, because we probably do it all day, every day, or most days anyway. Have you ever told yourself that you're going to do something today, and then for whatever reason you just don't end up doing it, right? People are probably going, yeah, of course, yeah. Or I go up for a workout in a minute, and then 40 minutes later you're sitting watching something going, where did that workout go? That kind of thing, right? Or I'll stop smoking in the new year, and then it's March, and you're still smoking, right? So what happens there? He would suggest that if you were one monolithic unit, then the decisions you make, the choices you make should just be automatically acted out, and there should be none of this stuff of going, well, I thought I was going to give up the sugar there a month ago, but whatever, right? There should be none of that. There should be no conflict between you, because there's only one part of you, which is the self. But we know that we run into conflict with ourselves and in ourselves, because we give ourselves directions and plans nearly all the time, and we fail a lot of the time, right? So there's something disconnected there. And he's saying that there's different parts of the mind, right? And Carl Jung would speak about this too, the different archetypes, right? So there's the part of you that is engaged in romance. There's the part of you that wants to do the work. That's the warrior type. You know, the part that wants to get more knowledgeable about things. The part that wants to be babied and just lie around having your needs met. There's loads of different parts going on there, right? And he's saying that this would have been what mythologies and religions were. Gods are not these things that are external to you that you bow down to. He's saying that the gods are, and not to minimize it, but they are the characterized, projected figures or symbols of parts of our own minds, right? Which is a myriad. It's not just a monolith of a thing. There's loads of different parts of you. And he called this polytheistic, right? Not strictly to do with religion, but he's saying that would have been most likely the pagan perspective on the mind, right? The different parts of our mind, the different voices and the chatter in our mind, right? That gets just projected out into stories, into rituals, into whole religions and cults. You have different cults, right? You'd have the mushroom cults, the boys living with nature. You'd have the virgin cult, right? To keep the flame alive. You'd have the Dionysian cult, right? Off in the woods, orgies, drugs, drink, all that kind of thing. The hippie, right? There's no difference. Thousands of years in between them separates them, but there's no difference in the practice they're doing, right? They're both venerating something, right? There's a part of their mind that has become dominant, and it has decided their actions and their behaviors and their morals, right? And this is what he's getting at. And you're seeing this in maybe not so much today, because I think there's a galvanizing of these cults, and they're tending to fall under a particular ideological umbrella. But in the 90s, you had what? In the 2000s, you'd have the emos, right? These kind of half contemplating lives, the hangover from Kurt Cobain kind of grunge people, right? They're cults. They have a dress code. They have predictable mannerisms. They have a predictable outlook on the world. They have predictable habits, right? They all hang around with each other. They have their own type of music. All that. They share a similar sense of humor. They share a similar mythology, right? Where did our way of life come from? These are cults, right? Cults need not be a bad thing, but just call them for what they are. We call them fashion. That's what we call them. We call it the fashion, right? Or it's a fad, or just going through a phase. You're not. You're part of a cult, right? So you'd have the emos in the 2000s. You had the grunge in the 90s. The 80s, what did you have? Pick whatever you wanted, right? You had the big hair bands, right? That kind of thing. Raw, overly kind of sexual masculinity, right? On stage, performing, looking beautiful and all that kind of stuff, right? Look at me in my most shining of moments, this kind of thing. And rock, right? Go back before that, 70s, the 80s, you'd have punk as well, which is a reaction to that, right? And before that, you the hippie movement and whatever you think the origins of that are. I guarantee you're probably mistaken, right? But you can see if you go back through the decades. Look, I seen a great video recently. It was a man and a woman, and for every decade or so, for the last 100 or 200 years, it was showing the different kinds of dress, the change in fashion, right? The change in fashion across the decades and centuries, and that's what I'm talking about. But these are cults, and you're not really seeing that too much anymore, because, as I said a few minutes ago, they're tending to fall under the same umbrella, which is conveniently enough, right? Anti-Western umbrella. The parents or the children are railing against the parents, right? And again, perfectly predictable. Perfectly predictable. Hang on now, sorry. So yeah, James Hillman was suggesting that people, as the psyche is multifaceted and it is populated by different characters, that those would become the cults and the religions and the mythologies and the hero stories of old. And we still have these, okay? We still have that tendency anyway, even if it's not external to us. We can see it working itself out because we've been so atomized as a civilization and as thinkers, right? As people that use their minds. We have been corralled into this perspective of only seeing things one or two ways. A false binary, right? It's either that or it's either this or that. And anything outside of that would meet the definition of insanity, right? It'd meet all sorts of DSM categorizations, right? You'd be insane in some way if you're outside of the norm, right? That's what psychiatry has done. It has funneled everybody into the same way of a similar way of interpreting the world around them. And anybody outside of that, he's a bit nuts, isn't he? Did you hear him talking about conspiracy theories? That's what we are, right? We're no different. We're no different than the Inquisition, right? With your blasphemy and your sinning, all that sort of stuff. We're the same now. We have things that you're not allowed to say, which is blasphemy, right? I'm not supposed to say that I think Islam has no place in Ireland, but here we are, right? The only reason I'm not supposed to say that is because people have the blinkers on. We can only see the world one of two ways, and there's nothing outside of that. There has been a concerted effort to destroy and handicap the imagination of Western people. And you see this in the ideas we come up with, where the only solution we see to a modern problem is to go back to the Crusades. Go back on horseback to the Knights Templar, right? Crazy to me. Crazy. And again, there's probably a practical element to it, because otherwise it would not be one bit enticing to anybody. But this is the issue. The dialectic. So, yeah. So yeah, look, on the Knights Templar, and I leave it on this now in a minute. The Knights Templar, if you contextualize modern society, what would be a handful of prominent problems, prominent issues that are affecting people's lives, right? One would be banking. The other would be pharmaceuticals. What do these two things have in common, besides running through society and dominating society and buying up nearly everything, including your right to say no, by the way? Those two things have in common is the Knights Templar. The Knights Templar, Crusades and all that aside, they developed banking. They developed the banking across Europe. Do you think they just gave that up? Ah, yeah, but they were all destroyed on the Friday the 13th and Jack the Malay and all that sort of stuff. They were all killed, and yeah, not all of them, no. Not all of them. And even if they were all killed, do you not think the people that killed them would have taken ownership and claim over all of their lands, their properties, their wealth, their whole system of banking? Do you not think they would have just taken that? Right? Of course. And ultimately, who would the Knights Templar aligned to? Rome. Right? Jesus. You can't have a Jesus without Rome. So that's who they were aligned to. Right? Also, you had the Knights Hospitaller, similar group. What were they involved in? Building hospitals. Building hospitals. Hospitals, treating people, medicine, pharmaceutical companies, banking. That's what these organizations got their wealth from, got their influence from. And now you have people in the West going, yes, let's get into that. Right. Right. If I was attempting to neutralize the Western people, I'd be selling them that too. Right? Can we get them to support us in some way without being explicit about it? Right? Well, they don't seem to be doing it on their own. Right? So we bring a threat in. We threaten them a little bit. Because if there's an external threat to a group, that group gets tighter. That group identifies themselves with something, right, in order to combat an external threat. Simple tactics, right? Simple tactics, and people are falling for it left, right, and centre. Again, if you're that way inclined towards Jesus and Catholicism, then off you go. But don't try and tell me that it's the answer to anything, because it hasn't been. It has never been the answer to anything. History tells us this, right? You do a little bit of digging, and people say, oh no, well look, wasn't it this, and didn't it save us from that? Who sold you that book? Rome sold you that book, right? Catholicism was the only show in town for a while. It was the only people producing any sort of writing or education. So of course they tell you they gloss up their part in the play. Of course they do. Right? This is simple. Are we still here arguing about this? Right? So yeah, Vatican, Knights Templar, Knights Hospitaller, banks, pharmaceutical industries. The Vatican is still there, right? Pope Francis is withdrawing all of the money that he has from the Vatican Bank, the IOR, that he's after investing, or the Vatican is after investing in all these other organizations and companies around the world, right? The IMF and stuff, they're all interlinked. These things are all interlinked. And he's bringing all of the funds back to the Vatican Bank. Why? Because it's untraceable and it's not monitored. It's not audited in any way. Records apparently are destroyed as soon as they're made. You can't trace anything, right? There's no way of accounting for the wealth in there. But the wealth is certainly in there, right? So you're looking at the Vatican, whose goal is to control the world. Catholic means universal. That's what Catholic means, universal. It's no different than Islam, right? The way they go about things might be different, but their ultimate goal, caliphate, Catholic, totally same thing, right? Temporal power, temporal control, with some weird words about the spiritual and all that sort of stuff, right? So they get you focused on the afterlife while they plunder the wealth out of your material world. And you're left with nothing. Nothing but a pew to kneel on. Right. Silliness. We need to grow up with this stuff, right? These people, for millennia, have plundered the wealth out of all of your nations. They've taken nearly everything from you. Irish people, the Vatican were the ones who gave the English permission to come in here and claim Ireland as their own, claim Ireland for the Vatican, and extract the tax of 1 penny per head from every person in this country for the Vatican. And then people say, but that's just because it was an English Pope that was there. Yeah, but not one single Pope following on from that withdrew that papal bull and said, well, hang on a second, Ireland was not ours to give to England, therefore that's null and void, England get out. Not one single Pope. Not Pope Francis, not your beloved John Paul II. None of them ever done that. None of them ever said that. I don't care if he got off an airplane and kissed the tarmac. Who cares? He covered up the sexual exploitation and rape of children for decades. He knew about it. But we're supposed to follow the religion that he tells us to follow. Come on. Come on. Right? Come on. And we're seeing the same thing at play here. The Vatican, who have overseen civilizations melt away and get propped up, is now still in the game. This is what they do. This is the game that they play. They manipulate whole swaths of nations and civilizations. That's the game they've played. Rome has been Rome for nearly 2,500 years, doing the same thing. And all of a sudden we're meant to believe that, oh, well, it changed its ways now, right? Liberalism and all that sort of stuff is after become. Who do you think funded liberalism? What do you think liberation theology is? The Vatican II, right? The Second Vatican Council. All of a sudden the West starts veering off this way towards Marxism, towards individuality, towards the liberation from the oppressor, right? This is all Vatican stuff. Vatican II Council, liberation theology. Go and read it up. We did not move away from our Christian or Catholic faith because liberalism came. The Vatican decided to move away from its own faith into liberalism, right? Don't get it mixed up. That's what happened. That's not me making it up. This is documented. Look at the works of Malachi Martin. He speaks about this in his book, The Jesuits, and in other books. He speaks about this. Many people speak about this. Their own paperwork, right? Their own minutes of the meeting speak about this. This is what they did. This is what they did. Because they see the changes in ages. They understand that people are getting a little bit more fed up with the traditional way of binding a society together under some sort of Abrahamic religion. They understand that people want to move away from this. So by anticipating a rebellion and anticipating people's dissatisfaction with that, you sell them something else. You sell them the liberation theology. You sell them the idea that they're oppressed, right? Because what is that? You're born into oppression. That's no different than original sin. You're born into a tainted world. It's the exact same mindset that came up with the original sin. Well, and what's interesting is The Irish people prior to Roman Catholicism had no concept of that. Even when Ireland became more aligned in that, there was arguments between Irish philosophers and Rome about that. Look up Pelagius, Pelagius. He argued absolutely man is not born tainted. He's born with the ability to make and exercise his own free will and make choices off his own back and deal with the consequences of them. But he's not born tainted because some Adam done something wrong. He might follow in Adam's footsteps and commit a sin, right? Do something wrong. But babies are not born tainted. They don't need to be baptized when they're born because you don't need to cleanse any filth off them because they're born pure. This is the Irish perspective. And people will tell you that we were always aligned with Rome over here. No, we weren't. That's a nonsense. Who told you that? Rome told you that, right? But anyway, that is me, and I think we need to grow up and we need to get a little bit sharper here because we're just falling into this nonsense way too easy. Way too easy. The Vatican is still a massive power player in this world, right? And in your life, whether you realize it or not, right? Do you think they just handed over to the universities and colleges that they funded and built just over to anybody? Oh, we don't need them anymore. You can use them. We've no interest in molding anyone's mind anymore. We've seen the error of our ways and we're just over here being devout now. Right. And then at the same time, your spiritual leader and your papa, right? Pope Francis is over there washing Muslim people's feet. Right? What's he trying to do? He's trying to unify. He's trying to unify. Because look at the power that gives him. If he can unify a Christianity and an Islam into the Chrislam, if he can unify that, look at the power that he has. They're still in that game.